I've hit record. Going live. Do. Looks like we're live. Looks like we're good. All right. Oh, I got to point this at Chrome. Give me 1 second. I forgot to do that because it updated. Looks like OBS changed how it uses the Windows screen sharing or screen recording stuff.
Interesting.
It's not too big of a change, but you have to go reset all your templates if you use that, because now it'll remember which monitor is which it never did up to this point. If it looked like it did, you were just getting lucky. All right. Ready to go. It's Monday, March 13th, 2023. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight we are talking about e-waste and old tech and what to do about it. So yeah, there wasn't Geek Nights last week because I was in London for work doing a bunch of stuff.
Go to London.
It's I do post that Snatch GIF in the internal chat every time I have to go to London. It's kind of a thing.
I mean, why would I would if I went to London, I would post it also.
And every time, nobody has any idea like what it's referencing, and I have to like explain it over and over again. Like, nobody's seen Snatch. Nobody knows that movie. I don't know how, but that's how it is. But it's an interesting time in London. I went to a conference. The con was like as big as pre-COVID times. It was just completely packed and like business as usual in London compared to New York. So far I seem good. I seem fine despite spending a week.
I'm feeling a little like I want to go outside because I see the number is like in the hundreds instead of the thousands it's been in, and I'm like,
for a couple of months we've been doing indoor dining, but we avoid places that are crowded.
I feel like I could just go, wherever now. Maybe.
Yeah, I went to a like multi-thousand person conference and literally 0 people masked at this thing at any point. And I gave some talks, and so far I seem fine, and we have no word of anyone getting COVID from it. So we'll see. But I am still wearing my mask.
It's clearly far from eliminated, and there are clearly, there's immunocompromised people out there, right?
Yep.
And it's just one more thing for them to worry about in addition to all the other things.
Yep. The one place, because like indoor dining, you can't wear a mask because like you're taking it off to eat, but I do still wear my mask specifically when I'm on public transport or when I'm in the public areas of an airport, because the airport feels like there's so many people from so many places, like the odds are just higher. And on the subway, the air is actually really shitty down there anyway, so wearing an N95 on the Newark subway is probably good for you, even if you're not worried about COVID.
It's not like, it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, it's not like I'm talking to strangers on the subway anyway. If anything, it makes people are more likely not to talk to me, though.
I've been wearing it outside just because it keeps my face warm when it's cold.
I actually never wore them outside unless I was in a dense crowd at any point.
Sometimes my face is cold.
My face, I got a beard. My face never gets cold.
My face is cold.
I mean, you have the cold sensitivity of a 90-year-old, and you've had that for as long as I've known you, and that has not changed, so.
It's cold.
So yeah, there's a bunch of news. We're not doing a tech news roundup. Sorry, listener. If you have any complaints about the low frequency of our tech news roundups, well, Scott is the dire taskmaster who says I can only do one a year. So take it up with him. Send him an email.
You did 2 in 2021, which means you took a loan.
I would argue that is not the fault of me doing the Tech News Roundup. That is the fault of you, the regulator, failing to enforce our policies. If anything, I should get an extra Tech News Roundup.
I went to work that day, but I'm still going to charge you a PTO. So you accrued. It's been a year since 2022, so there is now 1 roundup accrued.
We'll do a Tech News Roundup in April. It's coming. I got a whole...
You just accrue. If you just wait until 2030 something.
And then we just turn Mondays into This Week in Tech.
Like the whole year long, if you accrue enough roundups.
Is Twit even still podcasting? Did we outlast them?
I think it is. Yeah, I don't know.
Let's see. I'm going to look it up right now. Tech podcast from people you trust. This Week in Tech. Twit.tv.
I'm pretty sure it's still around, right?
Wonder if it even has the same people on it.
Silicon Valley Bank collapse. It's still going.
They started April 17th, 2005, and they're still going at their same rate. They only started a couple months before we went public. And actually, they went public after we started doing Geek Nights.
Anyway,
So a little news before we get into the news. In New York City, as you know, we have one of the oldest subway networks on Earth. We also have the best subway network on Earth. And I say this having used the subways in a lot of countries around the world.
It's like if you look at your scoring rubric, they're not first. New York isn't first in every category, but we're
no. Cleanliness, we are like near the bottom.
Train technology, like we are, in bad situations in a lot of the places on the scorecard, but the total score, we're in first place.
Because you got to understand, I got to remind people, because even in Europe, like in London, people just don't realize this, and they think it's insane that we do this. The New York City subway never stops. It runs 24/7, and it could be 3:45 a.m. on like Christmas Day on the least used, shittiest subway line in the city, and within 15 minutes, a train's going to come and get you.
Yeah, and you might say, well, Tokyo's got to be the number one, and it's like, oh, it's up there. It's up there.
It's got some pros.
Like 5 different train companies, and you never know which one to use.
Yep.
I'm sure the people who live there, it's fine, right? But
no, the people who live there complain too. And also, the last time we were there, we had a pass to ride a city-run bus, and we got on a bus that showed up at the city bus stop around the time we expected the bus, but it was some private bus, and then we had to pay because it wasn't covered by the city pass. But so New York City has for a long time been working on new subway cars. We talked about it on Geek Nights a bunch of times. The first of them are on the A train. Like the A train in New York, if you're lucky, you will be on one of the brand new subway cars in New York City subway. We have not had new subway cars like this in a long time.
Well, I think we have had them, but what happens is basically the city, when the MTA gets money, they put an order for subway cars, right? The subway cars show up, but they don't order enough cars to like replace every train in the whole subway system.
Yeah, that would cost more. That alone would cost more than like the 10-year budget of most of the rest of the cities in America combined.
Like over $1 million, right? And a train is like several of those, right? It depends on which line it is. But what they do is they'll order enough for like one line, and then they'll fit whichever line has the oldest trains, which right now is the 1 and the A, I think, right?
Yeah, the C, the C I think actually has the worst trains in the subway.
Is all sort of the same situation,
yeah.
The blue ones. But yeah, they basically they took the oldest trains out off the blue lines, and they put the newest train in on the blue lines, and now there'll be a new line that has the oldest train. Right?
Yep.
And that one will get the next upgrades whenever that is.
The coolest part.
The thing is, because of this rolling system, you always have a mix of like, there's always a line with the oldest trains, there's the lines with the middle-aged trains, and the lines with the new trains.
Also, depending on whether or not which of the ancient subway companies ran the line when it was built, numbers versus letters, with a few weird exceptions, they upgrade on different cycles because their tracks actually have different specifications for what cars can be in them.
Yeah.
So,
we talked about Tokyo has different train companies. Like New York used to have different train companies. Now it has one.
Yeah. And you know what? One company run by the government, way better than a bunch of private companies.
Yep.
So anyway, these new trains, the biggest deal about them is they reflect the modern needs of New York City in that, one, they have an open gangway format, meaning they're just one long open train. There's no more like doors between cars. It's just a long train. You can walk anywhere.
Now, when there's showtime in a car, you can't really avoid it. You can get away immediately, but the showtime was going to sort of come through the little gangway.
Yep. Now, right? even worse, in New York, there's a common knowledge. If there is a packed subway and a train rolls in and you see that the car that you could get into is pretty empty, there is a reason it is pretty empty. There is some dire shit going on in that car. Now,
probably some bargle or something.
Yep. Now it'll be a dire train. A train's going to roll in empty and you're going to wonder what's up with that train.
I think even in those cases, you could just be in a car far enough away from the direness to...
Yeah, depending on the direness. But the other thing, they've gotten rid of a lot of seats in the format that I like, that a lot of the London Underground has, where they have seats that'll come down if you want to sit in them, but they're up by default, which is good for two reasons. One, this makes way better areas for people in wheelchairs and with other accessibility accommodations to be able to get into the car. Like they have a space that's better for them. And two, the reality is in most of the subway lines in New York during a rush hour or a crowded time, you can't really sit anyway. And actually, studies showed if they got rid of those seats, they could cram so many more people in the train than those seats could accommodate.
Yeah.
That having them up
less on the A, but like the 6 is the one where they got to rip the seats out.
Oh, the
right?
7. The 7 should not have a single seat except like one special car that is for.
The 7 needs seats. Maybe not on the express 7, but the local 7 needs seats because that shit is long and there's old people riding that. Right?
The 7 almost needs.
The express 7, you could take the seats out.
The 7 could do a thing. You know what? India has a lot of the trains in India. What they do is they have woman-only cars.
Isn't that where people ride on the outside of the train?
Depending on where you are, but like in Mumbai and some of the cities, while that will happen, they'll have woman-only cars, but it's for people who identify as women, and it's mostly because of systemic, extreme assault and harassment issues. But sometimes they will also have cars dedicated for old people only. Whole car of old people. We could have the old person car with the seats, and everybody else, you don't get a seat.
We should have a bike car.
We should have a bike car. So, if you live in New York, you can try one of these on the A train. I will, if I have an opportunity to take the A train because it would be equivalent to something else, I'm going to try to check out one of these cars because I like trains.
Where do you go that the A goes?
Nowhere. I guess coming home from a Rangers game, sometimes the E doesn't run, and then the A to 42nd Street is actually the fastest way home.
And then you would get to swap, though.
Swap to the 7, which I got to walk in underground, which is a pro in the early part of the hockey season, but is a con in the late part of the hockey season because it's warm out, and usually I'll take a city bike, so we'll see.
Why don't you just do what I do and take the F to,
Well, usually what I do is take the E, which takes me directly home. It's the literal fastest possible way.
I feel like the Queensbridge is closer than...
Nope. The E, Queensbridge is slightly further away than E, and also the E is so much faster.
F is pretty fast.
Yeah, F is pretty fast. E is faster. Believe me, I am 100% sure. I would bet my life and my fortune on that.
Okay.
Anyway, the big news, 2 banks collapsed for completely unrelated reasons. One of those banks that collapsed was...
Three banks.
Well, maybe more.
Only the second one is one that we have to spend time talking about.
Yeah, and there might be more collapses coming. There's a lot going on here, but
it's really just the second one that's a meaningful.
Yeah, because the first bank that collapsed was some bullshit crypto bank. Fuck them and fuck everyone who worked with them. Like, I just do not care. The funniest thing because
crypto was bad and they were bad. It's not really.
So crypto is up on this news by a lot. And I'm not giving financial advice. I am not a registered investment advisor. One, I firmly personally believe that Bitcoin and every cryptocurrency will go to zero. It's a matter of when, not if. That is a personal opinion. But two, they're up partly because people who are, in my personal opinion, extremely stupid are believing that the collapse of these banks means putting your money in crypto would be safer, which is hilarious to a degree that I can't wait for them to lose their money. Like, I actively want to cyberbully them when they lose their money.
It's like these banks, or the story here is that the banks are insured and the crypto is not. So it's like what?
Yeah, nobody who has money in the bank we're about to talk about is losing their money. The only people losing anything are the people who invested in the bank itself or were senior executives at the bank.
The people who owned the bank are the people who are losing.
Yep. So Silicon Valley Bank, if you were not aware of this bank, which funnily enough...
I was not aware of this bank until I got to my current job, and I learned that basically not only my employer, but many, many, many tech startups, and I was even told Apple uses this bank.
Probably honestly, the majority, like the actual majority.
A very large number. So this bank started in the 80s. It's as old as we are for Silicon Valley tech companies. Like that was what they were about. It's just a regional bank, like whatever, not like the big national banks like your Chases and your Banks of Americas, right? But like those regional banks that no matter where you go in the country, you'll always see some kind of bank that's like only in that town.
Yep.
I used that kind of bank. There was some Connecticut bank I used until I moved.
I used to use a credit union, the Hudson Valley Credit Union. And when I closed my account, so fun fact, this is a while ago. Scott messages me and he's like, yeah, apparently the government owes you some money because you were looking at that website. And I looked and sure enough, the government owed me some money.
That's a completely unrelated thing.
Yep, because I used this local bank and I closed my account and I guess something went wrong and they had a bunch of money of mine. So I got that money back.
Right. So Silicon Valley Bank was a completely normal bank of that nature, just a regional bank. You can make a checking account there. You could get an ATM card from there. You can get credit card from there, right? But the vast majority of their customers were two kinds of people. Number one, there were Silicon Valley startup companies with business checking accounts, right? And money market accounts and those sorts of things. And the VC funds that invested in those startup companies. And often, a lot of times, you would even have the funding people tell the startups they were funding, like, yeah, if we're going to fund you, it's going to be conditional on you using this bank, right?
Now, why would they do this? Honestly, yeah, it's just convenience. The fact that
just convenience.
Imagine you have a bank where the people who work at that bank, they just really are used to and know the deal with how startups operate and how the money gets transferred. Like they have specialist knowledge that makes them better at doing this, whereas a standard generic bank might ask questions that are easily answered or not understand or be surprised by you cashing a $10 million check.
If you were a startup and you tried to go use some normal old bank, right? Your cash flow is going to be, you get funded and millions of dollars into your account very quickly.
Yep.
Right?
And then no more money goes into your account for possibly years.
Money does not enter your account at all, barely, because you have almost no revenues, but you're spending like mad. And it's like someone looks at that and they're like, money laundering, fraud.
Yeah. Imagine if I just went to Chase Bank and opened a checking account, deposited a check for $10 million in it, and then just proceeded to spend $1 million every few months. Just constantly, just grinding that down to zero as fast as possible.
Normal small businesses, when they have a business account at a bank, their local bank or whatever, it's like, they might get financing from that bank for various things here and there, right? If a startup tried to go get financing from one of those normal banks, they'd be like, what?
Yep.
No, this isn't, it's like, normally it would be like, I don't know, a deli wants to renovate or something and they want to finance it, right? And that would be a normal bank would figure that one out really easily, right?
Now the other thing is,
a startup was like, yeah, we need some financing for something. But no, we're not going to give you it, right? So Silicon Valley Bank specialized in helping out these companies. They would also, another one of their side businesses, I guess it's not a side business, but another thing they specialized in was mortgages for wealthy, startup people who were buying expensive houses in Silicon Valley. Right?
Which makes sense because that's probably the same person they're talking to who cashed that $10 million check.
Exactly. So this bank existed and operated as a completely normal, above-the-table bank, just a U.S. bank, nothing weird about it for as long as we've lived, basically.
Yep. And to be clear, the bank was not investing in dodgy startups. The bank was taking the money from other people who invested in dodgy startups and just managing that money for the dodgy startups. So if a dodgy startup goes under, that doesn't cost the bank anything.
Nope. So, just the sheer basics of banking, right, is people put in money, people take out money, like you're just a mattress.
Yep.
But you need to make more money because, how do you pay your employees? It's the only ways a bank can make more money to pay its employees, to buy buildings, to do all, to make the executives at the bank wealthy, right? They had to get money, more money than what's deposited.
Short of having a nationalized banking system, even if a bank was a nonprofit, it still needs money to operate. And banking employees are not cheap. Bank tellers and people who do banking stuff.
That's a good job. It pays well.
It pays real well, and it's real hard.
Get more money from? There's really two ways a bank gets more money. Number one, fees to customers. That's one way. What's the other way is, well, people deposited the money, but people aren't going to like withdraw all their money immediately. They're going to let most of the money just sit in the bank.
Yeah.
So you take people's money and you invest it in whatever, right? As long as it's not too shady, and you get interest, or you get dividends, or you buy and sell low and sell high, or you get bonds and then they mature, and you get more money by investing all the money that's just sitting in the bank doing nothing. And that's the revenues of the bank, is that extra on top. And if you get a whole bunch extra, you can share it with your customers, right? The other way, which is also technically investing, is to give out loans to people with interest, and they pay back the loans, right? You've invested in someone's house when you give out a mortgage. You invested in someone's car when you give a car loan, and then they pay it back with interest, and the interest is where the bank gets money from, right?
Now, one of the superpowers of the United States and a few other countries is that our banks really don't fail. Like, you can assume, regardless of everything else going on in the world, that if you've got money in a bank account, that money is there in that bank account, and you can get it at any time if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
That is, like, even as a extreme radical communist who hates the idea of capitalism, that is a really important function for society. Like, that is table stakes for a functioning society. Even communist countries need banks.
Yep. Now, being a bank, there's one other superpower that a bank has, which is that it can go to the Federal Reserve, the big bank, right, and borrow money from it, right, at an interest rate that they had to pay back.
You know, when you hear the news like, the Fed raised the rate by 50 basis points or something, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah. So you are a bank, and it's like, yeah, people deposited money with you, but you want even more money, you can go and borrow some, right? It's like, and then you could use that. Let's say Rim wanted to buy a house and I'm a brand new bank. I just started, right? I don't have any deposits, but Rim comes in and my first customer wants a mortgage. It's like, I haven't deposited $1 million for the Rim house yet. How am I gonna give Rim a loan? I borrow money from the federal government, from the Federal Reserve.
And just charge me more interest than the Fed charges you.
I charge you more interest on the mortgage than they charge me to pay that back. And boom, I'm making money at the bank. The government's making money. Rim's getting a house. It's going to work out.
Now, I want to point out, right-wing nut jobs have a weird thing about the Federal Reserve, and they say that this is evil in some way. They often pull religion into it. This is actually an extremely important and foundational lever on all economic interactions of any kind. The idea that the federal government can set this minimum interest rate, and that is a guaranteed rate that banks can borrow money, that is how the government can control the economy and prevent extremely bad things from happening.
Right.
Without that lever, we are so screwed.
Right. So when we want to make we want to put money into the economy, we want people to spend money on things, the government lowers the interest rate, and banks go, ooh, a low interest rate. That means I could give money to people who want loans, right? To go buy houses and cars and start small businesses, and we pump money into the economy, and people start spending it and doing stuff, right? Because the bank is getting money really cheaply at a low interest rate. And then they can charge a moderate interest rate to the customers, and it's good. Now, when the interest rate goes up at the Fed, the bank's like, well, listen, Rim wants this house, but I can't be giving Rim a loan because I got to pay back the government. Well, like, how many % interest now? Right? So that means I need to charge Rim a really high interest rate, and I got to be sure that Rim is going to, even more sure than usual, that Rim has good credit and is actually going to pay, because otherwise I'm fucked. I won't be able to pay back the interest to the Federal Reserve, right? So they wanted to slow down the economy because there's inflation. They've raised the rates recently, and they're still raising them.
Yep, because inflation is a big problem right now globally, not just in the U.S.
Yep, there's too much money out there. Money's worth less. Okay, we raise interest rates, and then there'll be less loans and less money going out. Pretty, that's the absolute most basic thing.
Yeah, take like Economics 101 in college, and this is what you learn.
Right, so Silicon Valley Bank, what happened there? Well, all the money that comes into Silicon Valley Bank is VC funds, right, funding startups. That activity has slowed down. Right? Not a lot of funding of startups going on in this economy.
I would say not even slowed down. It is mostly ground to a halt.
It's really slow, right? Like dramatically slow. meanwhile, the startups still have accounts there and they still exist, right? That is the ones that exist now.
Yep.
New ones aren't appearing, but there's the ones that already existed, right? And those startups were still spending like mad because that's what they do. They're startups. They pay Amazon bills and Slack bills, and they pay employees hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to make software.
Yeah, they're not putting any money back into that bank right now.
Yeah, no, and the startups don't have revenues, right? It's like they're not bringing in money. They're just spending the money. It's like, okay, so, the bank, at some point in time, right? All the money that came in, right? But how could the bank go under? Well, the bank, as we said at the beginning, needs to make more money than that somehow, and it does that by investing.
Now, that is perfectly fine. There's nothing actually wrong with this
That's how it's
concept.
supposed to work.
Yeah,
right?
and there's rules.
What the bank did, right? What the bank did is they bought treasury bonds, 10-year treasury bonds. That was their investment. It's a very safe investment. It's basically guaranteed in 10 years that you buy one, it'll be worth more than it was when you bought it. And 10 years from now, when you sell it and you give it back to the government gives you the money and you have more money than you bought it for. And you even beat inflation. It's like, it's great. It's congratulations. You bought a bond and gave it back, right?
Yep.
It's, it's like a savings bond, only way bigger.
And the rules are basically banks they can invest some percentage of their money and they have to keep some percentage of it in directly liquid cash to cover just day-to-day operations. Those regulations mostly came out of the 20s and then the 30s and the economic collapse and Great Depression, and we regulated the banks a little bit.
So really basic math, right? Investor Rim puts $1 million into the bank.
Yep.
Right? He's going to invest in some startups, right? A startup comes along. Rim says, I like that startup. He gives that startup the $1 million. It's now in the $1 million.
Scottco, make me a social media app that's going to make me billions of dollars.
All right, I'll do that. So I got $1 million in my checking account that I'm spending at a good clip.
Yep.
Right. The bank is like, all right, the $1 million came in. We got the $1 million. It's going out, right? But we're a bank. We need to make more money. Let's take, I don't know, $250K of that $1 million. Scott's not going to get down to $250K that fast, right? And we'll buy a 10-year bond. And, in 10 years, by the time Scott needs that $250K at the bottom of his account, right, we'll sell this bond and we'll have the $250K. And, unless Scott asks for all $1 million, unless Scott goes to the ATM and closes his account right now, we're going to be good, right?
Yep. And if somehow Scott and a bunch of other people close the account or pull all the money out or some shenanigans happen, they can borrow money from the Fed, or they could do other things like sell more stock in their own bank, because banks are often public companies you can invest in.
Yep. So that's what the bank did. And what happened was the interest rate went up, which means, and then people started withdrawing money and started depositing money.
Now, this is with a backdrop of nobody's putting new money into the bank because nobody's investing in tech right now.
Yep. So what happened was, even though the total assets of the bank were enough to cover all the accounts that people had, right? What happened was people were withdrawing so much that the liquid assets of the bank, the cash they had that they could immediately use, was running out. And all their assets were these bonds, their own shares of the own stock in the company. I guess the assets of the company, like, the chairs and the buildings and real estate, whatever the bank owned, right? It's still a company, right? And it couldn't really get more money from the Federal Reserve easily because the interest rate was really high. So when people started withdrawing and then creating a panic about withdrawing, and their stock value went down, which meant even less cash for them, right?
Yeah.
It was like, oh shit, people want to withdraw money. We don't have enough. And then as soon as you're underwater, it takes about the government comes in overnight and shuts you down.
You ever see the movie It's a Wonderful Life out there?
Yep.
It's called A Bank Run. It's not uncommon.
Mary Poppins, you see that one?
Yeah. And you know what? The reason this isn't a problem generally in the U.S., and in fact, it still isn't a problem because honestly, the government stepped in and did exactly what they needed to do, basically perfectly within the bounds of what the Democrats are allowed to do.
All of the bad things that happened here happened before the bank run. And then all the actions basically taken in response were the best actions that could have been taken given the circumstances. I don't know what you could have done better, government.
Yep.
You know.
This wasn't a bailout like a lot of people are saying, even people who should know better on the left who are trying
This was
to.
not a bailout.
I've seen multiple people complaining that, oh, government can't forgive student debt, but they're bailing out this bank.
It
One.
has nothing to do with this whatsoever.
Yep. So the government already insures banks. The U.S. government already says up to what, like $250,000.
Right. There is a company called the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Company. You see every single bank in the U.S., you're going to see this thing like FDIC insured, right?
Pro tip, do not put your money in a bank that is not FDIC insured.
No, never do that. But the FDIC, even though it's part of the U.S. government, right, it's a government agency, is just an insurance company like Lloyd's of London or Geico or Allstate, right? Or, Master Keaton, right? I think he was at Lloyd's of London. Anyway,
Oh, yeah, he was an insurance underwriter, I want to say.
inspector. He's an inspector.
All right, he was the inspector.
But the point is, it's just an insurance company, right? So you're a bank, and you pay insurance premiums to the FDIC the same way you pay insurance premiums on your car or your, renter's insurance.
So that if a bank gets fucked or something bad happens, the FDIC will just cover not the bank employees, not the investors in the bank, but the regular ass people who have money in that bank. The FDIC will make sure that their money still exists.
Right. So if a customer of the bank, you go to the bank, you deposit $250K, right? At least up to $250K. If you deposit $1 million in the bank in your one checking account and the bank fails utterly, there's a chance you might lose $750K.
Now, that $250K is an obsolete number that was created a long time ago, and really,
it should be $1 million, I think.
it should be maybe 10 million. I would say that banks are
At least
such.
one. But yeah, I agree the $250K could be changed. I don't know if changing it is just a policy or needs a law to change.
Yeah. Well, a big sort of side problem is that in the United States, there are some politicians like Elizabeth Warren, who tried to run for president, who have been pointing at the current system.
This is definitely Elizabeth Warren's like the exact center of her wheelhouse.
Yep.
Like,
Elizabeth Warren has been basically saying this exact thing is going to happen 100%. It is trivial to prevent. We just have to pass some basic modernization of banking law. And the fascist side of the American government said, nah, let's just not.
All right. Anyway, so the point is, if you deposit money in an FDIC-insured U.S. bank as a normal old customer, no matter what happens, the FDIC, because it's an insurance company, will come in and guarantee that $250,000 of your dollars are safe, even if the bank turns out to be the worst criminal garbage fuck-up bank that ever fucked up.
And then they will deal with, via the government, how to fuck over the bank that fucked over its customers.
So then what about the rest? If I put $1 million in the bank, I get the $250K. What happens to the rest of my $750K? Well, what happens is the FDIC will sort of give you a note. And it's like a promissory note, kind of like, sort of. And it basically says it's a note that's like, you used to have $750K in this bank that wasn't insured. And the FDIC will then take all the assets the bank has left, right? Whatever is left. And it will say, all right, what can we sell this for, right? And it will try to sell everything the bank has usually to another bigger bank or, whoever, right? It'll find ways to just turn the bank's remaining assets into money. And at the end, it'll look at that pool of money and it'll divide it up and everyone can cash in their note for whatever that amount of money is. That might take a while. That won't happen quickly, right? You could try to sell your note to someone else, usually at like a discount. So it's like, all right, I got a note for $750K. It probably won't even be worth $750K if I wait a long time. Maybe someone will give me $500K for it right now, and that person can afford to wait for the $600, and they're happy to make free money, and I need money immediately because I have a business and I got to pay my employees, right? Stuff like that. What happened here? The FDIC did its normal deal. It came in. It's like they operate so fast, and it's like people talk about bureaucracy and the government sucks, and it's like, yeah, a lot of agencies in the government suck and whatever, right? The FDIC is like the example that shows if you fund and well-train and support a government agency, it can operate like, like German trains. Like
Yep.
the FDIC is the German train of the U.S.
Imagine if FEMA was funded properly. When we had Hurricane Katrina, there would have been a literal army of people helping.
Put FDIC in charge of FEMA. But they come in to the bank, right? It's like, it literally is like a movie.
They do it still, like they show up at the bank's door and they're just like, yeah, we're taking over. Fuck all of you. Let us in.
They go through all the computers. They talk to all the employees. They go to they find all the cash. They, bag it up and count it. And it's like they basically take everything and sell it. And it's like this shit, right? We're talking on the show on Monday, right? These banks failed what, Thursday?
Yeah, like Thursday, Friday.
Right? By Sunday night, they were auctioning the banks, right? It's like, they come in and it's like they work around the clock, right? They fly in. It's like
there's even talk that they rejected a bid.
On Monday morning at the start of business, right? We, my company, right? Just, our money was in that Silicon Valley bank.
Yep.
They couldn't get the money out because the bank was closed, right?
Payroll's coming up.
On Monday morning, there's the money. It's like, there it goes. They made it work.
Yep.
I'm going to get paid, I guess, which is good because I wasn't going to work if I wasn't going to get paid.
So the government basically did everything right here. The bank will see exactly the situation that happened, but regardless of if any executives foresaw this or sold their stock early or anything that we'll see in the coming investigations.
Those are separate issues.
Yeah. The real buried lead here, to turn this back into a tech story, is that nobody's fucking investing in dodgy tech startups anymore. Like, that ship just hit a reef. And that is the actual, I'm not going to say problem. That is a big deal because a huge part of the modern American world relies terrifyingly too much on tech startups that have no revenue. And the only reason those companies exist is because they either always expected like Amazon or Google would buy them, which guess who's not doing that anymore, or VCs will come in with more rounds of money, or new VCs will fund new companies that replace them. None of that's happening anymore. There is way more rot in American capitalism, and this is a symptom of a far more wide-reaching problem. And as a secondary point, this would have been trivially prevented by basic modernization of banking regulation, which our government is incapable of right now.
Yep. So the end result is the FDIC, Treasury, and Federal Reserve came in and they did something, I guess, slightly exceptional, but at no cost to taxpayers whatsoever, right? They're basically guaranteeing that everyone who had deposits, even above the $250K, right, your whole deposit, if you were at this bank, or also the Signature Bank, which went down today, right? But basically, all your money that was in that bank, even above the $250K, it's there. You didn't lose anything. You don't have to worry about the promissory note, whatever they call it, right? All the money is there. You're good to go. And the people it's like, well, someone lost on this deal, right? Who lost money? The owners of the bank, the shareholders in the banks got fucked. No one's bailing them out, right? If you owned shares in Silicon Valley Bank, they are now worthless. There are some people who claim that they sold short because they saw it coming, and those people, I guess, are very wealthy now, right?
Yep.
And whoever let them borrow
and likely are going to be investigated just to make sure they didn't know anything that wasn't public and allowed to be used to make that kind of decision.
Yep. And, they think on the one hand, that's good because, some of those shareholders were evil capitalist people who deserve to get fucked, right? And that's good news that they got fucked. They found out. But in bad news, some of those investors were like, hey, Ed's retirement plan, and his retirement plan is losing value.
Yep. Now, of course, I would say that predicating retirement on investing in capitalist structures via markets feels like a extremely fucked up way to do that. But that's a separate topic.
But yeah, this rocked the world. Right? If this hadn't gone this way, it might have been a truly devastating news. Where
if the Feds if they had not stepped in on this could have turned into. You'll hear a lot of finance people would call it a contagion. There's still a low key contagion happening, but we would have seen more banks fail like by today.
Yeah. But not even that. But like literally every startup would not have been able to make payroll, and all the software engineers wouldn't have gone to work.
Yep.
And then there would all these websites would just shut down overnight, and it's like only the.
Imagine if I'm gonna make up, because I don't know who uses the bank and how much exposure they have, but imagine if like Square, payment processing, and Grubhub and Uber just stopped working today. Like,
well, to give you 2 examples, right? Etsy had to like basically stop making payments out to people who sold stuff on Etsy, and I guess they were able to probably continue them now, right? But Etsy had a lot of money in that bank. That was their bank, and they couldn't, like, if you sold your shit on Etsy, and then whoever bought your shit paid Etsy, and Etsy then was going to pay you, the craft person, they had to delay those payments until I presume today. Also, I saw a report that said Roblox, the child labor company, right, had like 100 million plus in that bank, and so Roblox would just could have if they lost all but $250K, Roblox would just disappear off the face of the earth if they lost $9 million.
Imagine what would happen if Roblox disappeared right now.
Overnight, Roblox is there last week, and this today they just. Gone.
Millions of parents who are not terminally online.
All the people who have Robux, they're worthless now. You can't use them.
Millions of parents who don't know about how the internet works would suddenly be confronted with children who are screaming and crying and having an existential crisis that they, 1, do not understand, and 2, have no way to fix.
That could have happened. It could have been if the government of the United States in this one area was not as competent as it is. Right.
The moral of this large competent governments
this morning.
Large competent governments that are actually beholden to the people are very effective at solving large difficult problems. Contrary to the popular belief of people who don't know better.
Let's move along.
Anyway, things of the day. So Scott grew up, many of you probably are too young to remember an era when every car didn't have air conditioning. Like now, like pretty much any car has air conditioning in the U.S.
In my early life, we had cars that air conditioning.
We had the good car with air conditioning and the other cars that didn't. At RIT, my first car didn't have air conditioning. My second car did, and then it didn't when it broke at one point, as we discovered driving to Wildwood one time together. But air conditioning actually makes cars more efficient, because the reality is, if you're driving a car, let's skip the whole, like, we actually have to ban cars fundamentally, but assuming they're here, cars get extremely hot in the sun, like dangerously hot. They have to be cooled. Rolling down the windows and just like doing things like that don't actually cool cars that much and actually make them even less efficient. Air conditioning,
dynamically speaking.
Yeah, air conditioning, modern air conditioning, is extremely efficient at keeping cars cool and reasonable, but that didn't exist a long time ago in the way we have today. So this video was making the rounds. It's a short TikTok. It's less than a minute long, that explains one of the ways you could cool a car in the 1950s, and actually, it's a pretty effective way of cooling a car, with an asterisk. It only works in places that have low humidity.
Yep.
It's basically a swamp cooler that hangs out your window, and it's a pretty cool thing. My grandpa had a truck from the 50s that he kept until near the end of his life, and he kept it functional. It had 2 notable things going on. 1, it had 2 gas tanks, and you could flip a switch to flip between the 2 gas tanks. And 2, it had vents in the front of the car that you could open that would funnel air from intakes in the front of the car into the cabin directly, and had exhaust in the back, because it was designed, this car was actually from the 40s. So this is just a pretty cool thing that I don't think any of you have ever seen.
My favorite old school way to cool a motor vehicle that doesn't have its own cooling is still the super old school butcher delivery truck.
Yeah.
They would go to the slaughterhouse, they would get all the meats, hang them up in a truck, and just throw a bucket of dry ice in there.
Of course, that only works for the back of the car where the dead meat is. If you put that in the front of the car with the live meat, you'll have 2 compartments full of dead meat.
That's correct. But it's great for the back of the truck.
Yeah, everyone, you're going to be...
Dry ice, close the door.
Even we were in college, and there was no air conditioning in our shitty apartment. And I remember we were like, why don't we just get a bucket of dry ice? That would solve things. And then it took us about 10 seconds to realize why that was a terrible idea.
Yeah. All right, my thing of the day. Thanks to the listener for this excellent thing of the day. If you are old enough to have used, cassette players, CD players, DVD players, these sorts of things in the 80s and 90s, maybe even 2000s, before, I guess, basically the pre-LCD era, when, before iPods, basically. All those devices typically had what's known as a VFD display, a vacuum fluorescent display. Once you see one, you'll say, oh, that kind of display. And this person on YouTube named Posey made a great video about VFDs. And I really like this video because it's a combo video. On the one hand, it's educational about VFDs, right?
Yep.
How they worked, zooming in on them with a microscope, right? Looking at how different like filters and colors and different designs and all sorts of, educational things, but also is an aesthetic video with, music playing and showing you them, right? In a very, and it gives you a very, I guess, nostalgic feel.
I mean, the style of VFDs, like the kinds of displays you can make with that tech, is a style that speaks to me personally and viscerally.
I want to make it's like, hey, these were designed that way because of the technology, but it's like, it's a great design. I would love to have user interface. People have done, Winamp skins have done this, right?
Yep.
But it's like, what if your whole,
was it either
Star Trek? Actually, all the Star Trek user interfaces are the same aesthetic as this.
Yeah, even the newer, we're watching a lot of the newer Star Treks and same kind of thing. And also, there was an era when LCDs got good enough, there were a bunch of LCDs that would be designed to try to look like VFD styling.
Yeah, but like, how cool would it be if your whole computer operating system had this aesthetic?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's what I want.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
Vaporwave me up, Daddy.
It's an S-tier video. Thank you, the listener.
In the meta moment, the GeekNights Book Club book is The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. I read the beginning. The fact that this...
I didn't even get the book yet.
So what I'll say is I've never read anything from Salman Rushdie other than some essays.
Me either.
His prose is S-tier prose. I'm just going to say it right now. Read the first chapter. Read the first paragraph. And anyone who would try to kill this man for having written this prose is just vile and dangerous to society. But also, the trope of a good angel and a bad angel, but they're also kind of buddies, and they're kind of like the evil one's not actually that good or not that bad, and the good one's not actually that good. Like,
yes.
This is also that. I
haven't read one of those in a while, but I know the type.
I like that type. I like that type a lot. That's a trope that I have enjoyed my whole life, and this book is right in that trope.
Like Neil Gaiman is good at those, right?
The first chapter is one of the best opening acts of a long novel I've read in a long time because it hits you hard. It doesn't give you time to process what you're reading. The prose is just going to pull you along. I am already deeply invested in this book, having read 18 paragraphs,
Okay.
give or take.
The final meta moment bit is the website is progressing rapidly. There's still some work to do, but we are nearing the end of getting the things done we need to do to replace the current website. And then there's still many other things to do after that, but we may hit that time.
Yep.
So
we went on long as we do when we skip shows. So to get right into the main bit, e-waste is a big problem, one of the biggest problems in society right now. Mostly e-waste, the burden of e-waste is borne by the poorest people on Earth in the least supported places on Earth. And we're going to try to talk about what you, in an industrialized society where you are insulated from the consequences of not dealing with it well, kind of how to deal with it. Because if you're listening to Geek Nights, you're probably, I imagine, you have at least one of every kind of cable you have ever owned in your entire life, just in case. I imagine you've got a box or a bag or a bin somewhere filled with a whole bunch of shit that you have collected through the years of owning and building computers that you keep around because you might need it. And you might have like a monitor that's kind of shitty, but no one wants it, and you don't want to throw it away because you feel bad, but literally no one on Earth wants this monitor.
Yeah, I mean, for example, right, I'm currently was doing a lot of cleaning of electronic stuff, right? And I had a bunch of hard drives, and it's like, I got a SATA 6 gigabit per second magnetic hard drive that's 500 gigabytes.
I've got a 3 gigabit per second 500 gigabyte hard drive.
I'm just saying, like, it's 500 gigabyte hard drive, a big 3.5-inch magnetic hard drive, and it's like you could get terabyte hard drives for like nothing.
Yeah.
Right, these days, very low prices, and it's like even if I try to give it away for free, it's like why would someone at least in New York City want it? It's like they would have to be extremely desperate for like any amount of storage because like you could get a vastly much more storage in much smaller like an SSD for less money, right?
Yep. And it's even worse. Like, there are people in the world, if you look globally, who could definitely use that hard drive. Yep. But the cost of getting it to someone, not even just in terms of dollars.
Transportation.
Yeah.
Finding that person, making a connection with them, right? And agreeing to it is harder even than the transport, which would still be extreme for the cost to send them the hard drive.
And not even the dollar cost, but the external cost, like the carbon cost of that shipping is worse.
Talking about the total cost.
That is probably worse than just giving them money so they can buy a modern hard drive.
Exactly. It would be cheaper for me to wire them money to buy a better brand new hard drive where they live in most places on Earth than for me to somehow package this hard drive and deliver it to them.
Now, I will say, too, while it is not illegal in many parts of the U.S. because America has a fucked up system to throw things like that away, it is illegal here to just throw that away. Like in New York, it is illegal to put that in the regular garbage, as it should be.
Correct. So how do I have this thing? I don't need it. I have no use for it.
Yep.
It is functioning. I erased all my data from it. That's a separate issue, right? And there's no economical way for me to find someone who wants it and give it to them, right?
Yep.
I mean, I put a posting online to see if anyone wants it, and some of my larger drives, 4 terabytes, 2 terabytes, I was able to give those away occasionally, even for money, to local people, right? The best possible result. But I found a listener to take some for free, right? Which is very fortuitous, but that's really nobody else wanted to take them at all.
Yeah.
And that listener only wanted them as like, hobby extra drives or whatever, right? Like they weren't useful in any way, right? But it's like, if no one really, what the hell are you supposed to do with this thing? Well, you can take it for e-cycling, right? To your local e-cycle. I think, Staples take stuff. Best Buy take stuff.
They'll take some stuff. That's sort of the crux of this. The first thing you should try to do is just check out all your social media and free tables and just see, is there anyone in your orbit who, for relatively low effort, wants the thing? Because you never know.
The closer they are geographically, the better, right?
Yep.
Handing it to someone just who lives near you is like the best possible thing.
Yep. But 2, after that, look at big box stores, even though they're disappearing. Like, it's amazing that Staples and places will even take this stuff because they even sell electronics. But while they still exist, try to find a place that'll take it. But you'll have to do some research because there's a lot of different kinds of e-waste, and every kind of place you could take it to will have different rules on what they will and will not take.
Yep, very important.
And it gets hard because, like, a lot of e-waste, like, I have a lot of e-waste in the apartment, and most of it is stuff I've had for a good chunk of my life, and I'm finally deciding to just get rid of it. So a lot of it is like cables that no one will take, that are useless to anybody, to the point that some of this stuff I got to hold out until one of those amnesty days that New York City has that most of the world doesn't have, where they'll fucking take anything. You can roll in there with an atomic
disposal. It's safe disposal day.
Yep. But they'll take
what's actually happening on safe disposal day is that private e-waste companies that have partnered with the Department of Sanitation are setting up shop in the park to, right? It's not like an amnesty. It's right.
But what their hope is that people who have dodgy stuff will just take everything there, no questions asked, because they can then sort it into all the different types of companies that could take and deal with different kinds of things. Because the way you deal with an old light bulb is very different from how you deal with an old battery or an old CRT or an old hard drive.
Yep. Now, so what the e-waste companies in your area are doing varies greatly, right? Some of them might be doing things like, oh, this still works. Let's see how many computers I can put together, and we'll put those in schools and for the kids to learn on, or give them to people who are so, unfortunate that they can't even buy the cheapest computer. It's like, all right, well, here's a computer that goes on the internet and has a web browser. It's better than absolutely nothing. It's slow and weird, but hey, it's a computer, right? For nothing. Here you go. Some of them are like, all right, we this TV only needed a new capacitor. We fixed it, and now we'll resell it and get some money. Some of them might be doing that sort of stuff. Some of them might be saying, all right, this doesn't work, right? There's no way we can make it work. But inside of it, there is a valuable magnet.
Yep.
We can harvest the good, the valuable materials. There's some tungsten in this one, right? Stuff like that can happen.
Yep. And in the worst case scenario, they might even just still they're just going to throw it away. But instead of just putting it in the general stream of waste that ends up in a landfill or an incinerator or something, they are regulated, at least depending on where you are. Like, watch out if you're in certain states. They're regulated, they'll follow the laws, and they will dispose of it in the way that is required, or at least that does the least harm.
Yep.
And if they don't, they can get in trouble.
And now the worst possible result is not even just it ending up in the regular trash and going to Staten Island to sit in a heap. That's real bad. But even worse is if it goes to a heap somewhere else in the world where there are child laborers digging through looking for something that has like a trace of gold on it. And then there's some horrible environmentally damaging process where they extract the tiniest amounts of rare, valuable elements from all the electronic waste that gives everyone there gets cancer, and it poisons all the land nearby. And that's happening in a lot of places.
Yep. Because the reality is recycling is a complex process, and e-waste is a new threat to society that we haven't really dealt with the last 4 or 5 major threats in this type of space. Yep. And this is just yet a newer one.
So what can the best thing you can do?
Not buy useless shit, buy as little as possible.
Right. The real solution is to avoid the problem in the first place, right? You want to not, if something is still good, right? Don't replace it. I was some fool. I was buying iPhones every 2 years, right? And for those first few years, I would take the old phone and give it to someone I knew who it was better than the phone they had, right?
Yeah.
But then it's like, once I got to iPhone 7, it's like, who wants it? I'm trying to sell an iPhone 7 on eBay right now. It's like, what's it, like $5? Like, no one wants this thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, keep it and use it for as long as you can. When iPhone 8, 9, 10 came out, I was like, you know what? The 7 is still working fine. Why would I buy a new one for no reason?
Yep. I got one 13. I'm not going to get a 14 because this thing works fine. I'll get rid of it when the battery breaks.
And it's like, I'm paying Apple for Apple Care every month. The 2-year Apple Care on the iPhone 12 mini ran out. I'm paying Apple $9 a month, right? But you know what? That's going to extend the life of this iPhone 12 mini, hopefully 5, 6, 7 years, right? Avoid having to buy another new phone.
Right.
The phone, by the time, if they come out with, 6G and the phone isn't, I want to get a new one, then I could probably find someone who would take it. Right.
I rocked the same ancient Android phone for 4 years, and the only reason I upgraded was because the battery didn't last at all anymore, and so multiple spectrum changes happened to the point that the phone actually did not work anymore.
Yep. It's like there's usually a way to find a way to keep something going. It's like, especially in the current climate where there's all these incremental upgrades instead of significant ones.
Yep.
It's like, do you really need the Switch OLED? Because if you don't have a Switch, get the OLED one.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's better. But it's like, if you got a Switch, and I guess you could find someone to take an old Switch pretty easily still. But it's just a good example of you don't need that minor upgrade. You can skip on that.
Well, Mike, I have the same. Now, one thing you can do if you're listening to Geek Nights, if you're the kind of nerd who has money, the philosophy that we talked about on old Geek Nights, and it comes up time and time again, is if you're going to buy something, buy the minimum viable thing necessary to accomplish your goal, or buy the best possible thing. So what I've always done, and this is only something you can do if you have the privilege of having piles of money, every time I build a new computer, I overbuild it so that I will not have to upgrade it or replace it for as long as possible. I'm still rocking an Intel i6, not i6, the 6th generation 6700K, the one that everyone bought like 6 years ago.
Yep.
Windows 11 won't even run on this thing.
Now, what can the industry do? Well, what the industry can do is really, I guess this has been unpopular in some places. I know there was a thing in Brazil, but like Apple stopped putting chargers in there and cables.
I think that's a good thing. I have
yeah.
so many USB chargers that are just garbage because I don't need them. I have an Anchor.
I got a whole bag of like cables and stuff that like I don't need.
I filled 3 Fresh Directs bags with old cables I didn't need.
3? Wow, I've got like half a bag. But
well, some of that was like cables for old Ataris that no one wanted. Like literally no one wanted them. Some of that was old audio cables that didn't work anymore, but I kept them because I kept having ideas of fixing them.
Yeah, I got like, I just had too many HDMI cables. HDMI cables are still useful, but it's like, I don't need that as many as I had. I didn't need that many.
I also finally bit the bullet. I had every combination of AV cable on Earth, and I did an audit of every format that's actually obsolete. Like, I had a lot of HDMI to DVI adapters. Like, that's never going to get used again in my life.
Yeah, I had some very weird cables that, like, I couldn't even tell what they were for. And, like, basically, I thought about my actual use cases, right? Anytime I found a thing, I'm like, is the scenario that I'm going to actually use this, is that even like remotely likely? Like at one point, like even if it was just, if it was just once, like if I could imagine like, yeah, there's going to be that one time I need this, right? And there's no other way for me to do the thing without this, then I kept it. But everything else, like, no, there's no way I would need this many HDMIs. There's no way I would need this specific cable, right? There's nothing I own that's going to use it, right? Get it out of here. And I had a whole bag of stuff. And the way to prevent that is, like I said, give people less stuff, right? That way, it's like if they already have a cable, then they can use it again. They don't, got an iPhone, you got a new iPhone, you still got cables lying around. You don't need new ones. And people can always, if they need one, buy the one that they need, right? Or get a used one from someone else who has too many.
2, standards. Like the fact that we're forcing Apple to go to USB-C, even though they're kind of doing it in a bullshitty way by giving us USB-C to lightning cables, which literally defeats the purpose, but I digress. That is a good thing. Fuck that lightning cable. The USB-A and USB-C should be the only the only cables we use, especially for power in the modern era. Maybe the third one is that regular old black cable that goes into the power supply of your computer. A lot of stuff standardized on that over the years.
Yeah, I had a lot. That was the cables that I got rid of.
I had like top 15 of those because I was always keeping them.
A lot of micro and mini USB cables. And it's like, I have devices that use mini and micro USB still, and I'm not going to get rid of those devices because I don't want to, they still work great.
I kept 2 of each of those cables that I still use, and I got rid of the rest.
But I don't need that many. I had so many. And then I had the black standard power cables. It's like, what do I have that uses those? Like a handful of things.
I have a lot. All the audio equipment uses those, thankfully. Like they standardize.
But everything most of the things that use them are already plugged in.
Yeah.
So, right? So it's like, how many extras do I need? Like 2 or 3, right? I had like 7. It's like,
you got to have, generally a good idea is have at most of that kind of thing, the one extra that you use, like, oh, hey, I bought a new computer and I need to be able to set it up or something. And then the backup, just in case one breaks.
If I buy a new computer, it's going to come with a power supply. The power supply is going to have another one of those fucking cables, right? And it's like, I don't need another one of those. You just give me the power supply only. I don't even need the internal cables. My old power supply, I have a bag of them, right?
In fact, if internal power supplies, the fact that there are modular ones, we should mandate by law that power supplies like that should be modular and standardized. That way, I don't even need to get more like that rat's nest of cables. I only use 3 of them, 2 for the video card, 1 for the motherboard anyway.
Yep, exactly. And then by the standards, if we have standards and they don't change, right? When we change the standard from mini to micro to whatever, USB, when we change right, it's like HDMI to DisplayPort to USB-C. It's like, what happens is over time, it's like I got the, you know what really a cable I had a lot of? The USB-A, AB ones where it's big on one end.
Yep. I've got a lot of A to B and A3 to B3, and
the only
those.
thing I have that still uses the big one is there's two things that still use the big one.
All the old hard drives I'm getting rid of.
I have a HDMI capture card uses one, and my scanner uses one. So I needed 2 of those. Yep. I had like 10.
But there was an era where cables were changing a lot because technology was advancing rapidly. And
exactly.
I would argue now we're at a point where there is a long plateau where we should standardize on, I would say very simply, that big old mains power cable that goes in the back of power supplies, that keep that standard, that's fine. Mm-hmm. The standard that in America that takes mains power into the little left-right, the little black that plugs into the back of like an anchor, like that's fine. Mm-hmm. USB A to C and C to C. And DisplayPort at most. Fuck all the other cables.
DisplayPort can go on USB-C now.
It could, so we should deprecate regular old DisplayPort over time. Yeah. But USB-C is a magic cable that honestly can do everything we're going to need for like a decade to come. And if you think I'm wrong, what the fuck are you going to do that USB-C can't do? Go read that spec.
Yeah. So unless someone invents something totally new, which hopefully they won't.
And if they invent something that new and that revolutionary, then technology and society change again, just like they changed when we invented USB-C.
Yep. But it's like, if we don't change standards, then people buy stuff, right? And they can use that stuff for a long time until it actually breaks, until it's actually no longer working, right?
And then we can even start to assume we don't need to give people more of that thing when they buy commodity equipment.
Yeah, you just don't have to include we have to include the cables when we roll stuff out. But it's like, I think even at this point, it's like there's enough USB-C cables out there already. And if someone goes to a store, like if you go to the store and buy a television, I don't think it comes with an HDMI cable.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't come with any cables by default, I would say.
Right. Best Buy sells HDMI cables, overpriced ones, like Monster Cable. That was a whole business, right? Of selling bullshit cables. But it's like, if you've already got some, don't force some on the people. And it's not just the cables, but I've already got SD cards. You don't need to include one with my digital camera.
Now, the companies do include this partly because they see it as a customer service thing, because people who buy technology often don't know a lot, and they don't know how to deal with cables. And
a non-technology person who goes to a store and buys a camera and might be upset, because this person in the store is now got to upsell them and all this other shit.
I think we should say, by default, no technology comes with those commodity cables anymore. But when you buy something, kind of like how if you go to a website like Grubhub, there's a checkbox of, I want plastic silverware with this order. You don't check it.
Exactly.
You don't get the plastic silverware. You should have to say, I want all the cables. And if you don't want them, you don't even have to make it cheaper. The TV could cost the same either way. Just let me, the nerd who knows I don't need the cable, not get the cable, and start to teach society to keep the cables that work and not expect the new ones with everything they buy.
Yeah, but basically all the accessories that go around a thing, right, need to only, basically should be sold and manufactured separately and distributed and reused for extended periods of time, so people who buy technology don't end up with a enormous glut of just extra crap that's unnecessary that they then have to redistribute.
Yep. So the moral of all this, if you got E-Waste 1, don't buy useless shit you don't need. But if you got a bunch of it, which a lot of you probably do, especially if you're a nerd and you were hoarding it and now it's time to get rid of it, it's okay to bite that bullet and get rid of a bunch of stuff at once, because as long as you accumulated that over the last 20 years and you're not continuing to buy useless crap from this point forward, just rip that Band-Aid off. You'll be happier. But 2, throw it away the right way. Use Google and figure out how to get rid of the things you've got and follow those instructions. If you choose not to do that, you're a bad person.
Yep. And your life will be so much better without all that crap lying.
Oh, do you know how good it felt to get rid of the gigantic cabinet that I had filled with worthless cables?
Yep. I got my whole corner of my room here on the floor that no one can see was like a big, just, mess. It looked like a rat king lived down there. And now it's neat and tidy, and I have more floor space.
I throw away a lot of cables that I could not identify what they even fucking plugged into.
I was able. There were some close ones, but I was able to identify all of the weird ones. Some of them are gonna go because I don't need them, and some of them got put in a bag called Weird USB. That's the name on the bag because one end is USB and the other end is what the fuck is that?
I got one that was USB on one end and what looks like a headphone jack on the other end. I don't know what the fuck that was for. Probably something bootleg.
One of the good ones I had was the HDMI on one end and what the fuck is that on the other end?
Yeah.
And it was actually the tiny HDMI that goes in a GoPro, so I saved 2 of those.
Oh yeah, tiny HDMI. Also, people forget there's mini DisplayPort. There's a lot of weird cables out there.
Yeah, I don't have any of those. Those are for old Macs.
Yeah. I did not have a single VGA cable. I am proud of myself.
I have exactly 1 VGA and 1 DVI, and I got rid of all the other ones a long time ago.
I got rid of DVI and VGA too. Fuck them.
I still have a couple things that have a VGA port on them.
Oh, that is true.
They're not in regular use, but it could always happen. So
I decided
one.
if I am in a situation where I need a VGA cable and I do not have one.
VGA cable.
Yeah.
I will send it to you. That will be the most.
But let's say you got rid of it
option.
too. I would say that I would accept that fate like a Greek hero, where a Greek hero who's like, I am going to hubris against the gods. And then when the gods strike me down, the only response is, you know what? I hubris. I welcome this lightning bolt.
Actually, but that's it, right? So, you're hubris. You need the VGA cable. You don't know me, and you can't get mine. Guess what? You're going to find someone else in the neighborhood who's got one.
Yep. And if you're at a convention,
you could be on the receiving end of helping someone out. Do you need a 200 megabyte hard drive? You could find someone who's just going to give you one for free. Go on your Craigslist or your Facebook Marketplace or your local whatever, right? Don't go buy one.
I found a 500.
That would be a fun. This would be really fun. How many if you only collected free stuff from people where you live, how many, regardless of performance or quality, how many functioning computers could you construct with free stuff from the neighborhood?
Yeah. Pick some minimum line, like could it launch a web browser and look at a modern website?
Linux distribution and boot it.
Yep.
Can you boot a Linux, period, by any means?
I think I could build a couple computers just out of shit laying around the house, to be honest.
Maybe. I don't have any motherboards left.
I did get rid of some motherboards that I had.
I don't have any.
I'm down to every motherboard I got is in a computer and currently powered.
Yeah.